From in the shadows she calls, and in the shadows she finds a way, finds a way. And in the shadows she crawls, clutching her faded photograph, my image under her thumb. Yes, with a message from my heart. Yes, with a message from my heart. She's been everybody else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. Everybody else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. Hey, and in the doorway they stay and laugh as violins fill with water. Screams from the bluebells can't make them go away. Well, I am not 17, but I've cuts on my knees, falling down as the winter takes one more cherry tree. She's been everybody else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. Everybody else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. Everyone else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. Everyone else's girl.
A story is true, a story is untrue. A story is a work of transformative fiction. As time extends, it matters less and less. Hello, I'm Kendra Spring Classic, and welcome back to Reading Between the Lines, a podcast by fandom nerds for fandom nerds. This podcast is all about fan fiction, the much-maligned art form that, nevertheless, brings many people cathartic levels of joy, not just in the reading of it, but in the creation of it as well. If this is your first time listening, welcome! We're so glad to have you. But be sure to go back and listen to episodes 1 and 2, A Vulgar Holy Thing by Lupus Maris, and You Turned Me Into Somebody Loved by Jay Noves. 2 stunning sweet stories and 2 fascinating and insightful interviews. In the first 2 episodes, I featured Silver Flint stories. This time, we're shifting focus and looking at the fandom's favorite punching bag, Eleanor Guthrie. As much ire as Eleanor incites in the Black Sails fandom, she equally inspires introspection, as my chat with Mary, aka VVitchqueen, will only serve to illustrate. This is a brisk 10-minute ficlet, a major change in pace, but it also accompanies our longest post-story discussion yet. I'm so very excited to share Mary's story, Your Life for Mine. Be sure to stay tuned after the story when Mary and I talk about her motivation for choosing such a highly unlikely subject and take a deep dive into family dynamics, childhood trauma, and yes, daddy issues. So throw back a stiff one, lie back on the couch, and unpack your trauma with us as we hang out and dish on Eleanor and Vane. Your Life for Mine by VVitchqueen. Summary. A character study about how Eleanor might have been feeling right after she visits Charles in prison in episode 309. Spoilers up to 309. Notes. I have no idea why I did this, but Eleanor baffles me, and I kept wondering what she was thinking after she talked to Charles in prison, so I decided to write it. As a prolific Eleanor hater, I tried not to be unnecessarily harsh here, and this is my take on her and why I think she's like this. Your Life for Mine. Eleanor walks away from the cell without turning back. She holds her head high as she passes the guards, looking forward, hands clasped together in front of her, squeezing so tight that her fingers are beginning to turn white. But she cannot lose her composure. Not here. Once she is back in her room, however, she collapses onto the floor. She holds a pillow over her mouth to muffle her sobs as the tears begin to fall. Sometimes, when she cries, she is able to keep herself collected enough to maintain her dignity. But these tears were ugly. Ones that came with red eyes and snot and a lump in her throat where she stifled her keening. These tears were honest. She claws her hands into the pillow, frantically running through everything Charles said, everything she said to him. She tells herself that she was justified, that she had to do this for a higher good, that he has done monstrous things, and therefore he could not have loved her. Not really. The alternative was accepting that she herself was monstrous, that she could not have loved him. Not really. Deep down, in a hollow place inside of her she cannot bear to acknowledge, she believes that only a monster would find her lovable. It does not cross her mind that Charles could do terrible things and still truly care for her, that both of them could commit grave sins and still be deserving of connection and comfort. She searches her memories, trying to find some scraps of evidence that Charles never loved her. There are terrible ones, of course, her father's murder, his indifference when Max was being abused by his crew. She feels rage boil up within her at the thought, and most of it is directed at Charles. If she were honest, she would admit that she blames herself for betraying Max. She could never allow Charles to know this, of course, because to do so would be to lessen his guilt, and if he didn't feel guilty, he may have stopped trying to win her back. She can't deny, however, that among these memories were others. The touch of a hand in her hair, the piercing eyes that seemed to look into a part of her that felt hollow and longing, but that she was unable to open for him. She can tell herself that he's a monster, yet she can still remember the feeling of her hand on his chest, quietly soothed by his steady heartbeat. A man, then, not a monster. Eleanor screams now into that pillow, shrill and unrestrained. "He promised to deliver you to me," Charles had said. "Promised to exchange your life for his." He didn't have to realize her worst fears about her father. It would have been kinder to take this knowledge to his grave. She knows he was telling her the truth. Despite what she may have told him, Charles Vane is not a liar. But this is incidental. She knows her father well enough to know the truth of it. She was never good enough for him, not even toward the end when they were repairing their relationship. Charles always hated him, and told her that her value wasn't determined by his favor. Eleanor would tell him that he didn't understand, because his fathers were less complicated. One was cruel and despicable, and the other nurtured him and saw his talent. He didn't understand what it meant to have a father who was both at the same time. "What a fantasy this must have been for you," he said. He was right. Until she saw him, it had been a fantasy. She was doing her duty to the governor by taking out the biggest threat to him. Maybe he would even be proud of her strength to take charge and do such a hard thing. Charles would hang, and the pirates would turn against each other, making space for order to be restored to Nassau. It was a fantasy, and now it was shattered. She hadn't found the fearsome pirate Captain Vane. She'd found Charles. Her Charles once. Nothing he had done could completely remove the way she felt when she saw him. And not even death would take it away. She lets out a shuddering sob, unable to keep the weight of her actions from engulfing her. Charles would hang. Because of her. There was nothing she could do about it now. She pulls her face away from the pillow and notices that it is stained with blood from her hands. Charles's blood. Still, the tears come, but she is so exhausted that she feels completely disconnected. She observes her bloody knuckles, the fresh wounds betraying any stoicism she may attempt to project. These wounds belie a pain that can only come from loving someone so deeply that you burn hot enough to destroy them. Charles had said that she thinks his love is an inconvenient obstacle to her ambitions. And he's right, in a way. My ambition is to live, Eleanor thinks. She was once in his shoes and was given the opportunity to save herself. Her affection for Woods may be growing, but she did not come back to Nassau for him. She did not come back to Nassau for Charles either, or for vengeance against her father. She came back because the alternative was a noose around her neck, spectators clawing for pieces of her hair and clothing to sell as souvenirs. Fuck that. Charles had refused to sign the confession, of course. Eleanor had hoped that she could at least feel like she offered him the option of mercy. It didn't feel merciful in the end. The gesture feels hollow. She knew he would never supplicate to anyone, much less a king. She had long thought that Charles, who eschews any connections to legitimate avenues of power, was misunderstanding a fundamental truth. There will always be empires, always someone at the top who will press their boot on your neck whenever you become an inconvenience. She grew up under a long shadow of threats, from pirate captains, her father, the crown. It didn't really matter, because she knew that at the end of the day, she was weaker than they were, and she had to make herself convenient if she didn't want to be crushed. There was no such thing as a world without fathers. She takes a deep breath and stands, finally relinquishing the abused pillow and placing it on the table next to the bed. Someone else would take care of it. Get your shit together, she tells herself. She needs to go visit the governor to continue with her plans. Her feelings about Charles no longer matter, and she can choose to stand by her choices or crumble under the weight of them. She walks over to the mirror and wipes her eyes, cleans her hands with a cloth. She has to move on now, and cannot allow the governor or his men to see her like this. With a final deliberate exhale, she approaches the door and opens it, to find Nassau waiting for her. I'm so excited to be joined on today's episode by the insightful and introspective Mary, aka VVitchqueen, a fanfic author I've gotten to know through Twitter, and was absolutely delighted when she agreed to come on the pod and discuss Eleanor and all things Black Sails. We're going deep today, folks, so grab your scuba gear and let's dive right in.
Okay, so welcome, Mary. It is absolutely wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. I'm nervous, as you can probably tell from how nervously I said that, but I'm very excited to talk about this.
So I absolutely loved this fic, and not a lot of people write about Eleanor. She's
don't.
polarizing, very polarizing in the fandom. But she's so fascinating. So to start off, when did you first discover Black Sails? Were you kind of new to the fandom, or did you watch originally when it was airing?
Yeah, so it was interesting actually, because I was pretty new to the fandom kind of this past summer. I sort of came on board with the Our Flag Means Death fandom, kind of some crossover there that happened, and the Black Sails fandom seemed to kind of have a bit of a renaissance. So I came that way, but actually it's interesting because Black Sails is my partner's favorite show ever. And he had been trying to get me to watch it for a really long time. And it wasn't that I didn't want to, it was just always I don't know if I'm trying to get into that right now. So I did know some things about the show going in, some pretty big things, but he kind of caught me in my pirate brain rot moment and was let's watch Black Sails. And we started it, and it was just I don't even know, it just kind of took over my entire brain. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Shout out to him for showing it to me.
So what is your fandom background? I know you said you came in from Our Flag Means Death. what is your history with fandom involvement in terms of like just really getting entrenched with the rest of the community?
Yeah, so actually in the past, I was more involved with like the cosplay kind of side of things. I was really into the like Marvel and like Marvel comics and MCU fandom for a while. A bunch of other kind of like miscellaneous Buffy, Hannibal, like a few of the Star Treks, Supernatural for a while, some just like kind of assorted things. But yeah, that was kind of more what I did. And I wrote a few fics when I was like a teenager that, as far as I can tell, no longer exist, and I'm glad about it. um but yeah, so this is kind of the first time as an adult I really have gotten into like the fanfic, like the writing fanfic side of things. Yeah.
There tends to be like a core group of fandoms that kind of all come together to produce Black Sails fans. It's like a kind of like a birth chamber. Like there's
Mhm.
Supernatural, Our Flag Means Death, and Hannibal a lot because of those
Mhm.
dynamics. Oh my gosh, the
Yeah.
parallels.
Yeah, there's so much of that. And I was predisposed to pirates because I grew up in North Carolina, and like we would go with school to the Outer Banks and they would tell us about Teach's ghost, and like I remember trying to look for Teach's ghost at night from like the hotel room. And
Oh
so,
wow.
yeah, so like I had sort of like a childhood kind of thing going on with it too. So
Do you have any desire to write for any other fandoms, or has the brain rot just settled firmly right now?
it's mostly still Black Sails. I'm actually currently writing one for the game Disco Elysium. That's a now very late birthday present for a friend of mine. But so those are kind of like the two that are like biggest in my mind right now. And maybe I've had some Black Sails Witcher crossover kind of things in my head, but
Oh,
but
interesting.
yeah. hmm but yeah, but mostly still Black Sails is like what I'm interested in writing, because I feel like I've really like gotten into those characters, like
Hmm.
into their brains in a way. And so it's like yeah, that's more like in terms of writing, that's definitely more what I'm interested in. Mhm.
Yeah, and there's so much just meat on the bones to pick at when it comes to Black Sails. Like it is
Mhm.
infinitely accessible in terms of doing AUs or just you can look at any of these scenes from a multitude of angles and get something new. And people
Mhm.
prove that with endless rewatches as well. So it goes to show that it's going to be very rich fodder for fanfic writers as well. What prompted you to start writing Black Sails fan fiction?
Well, it's funny actually, because I had started to get involved with the fandom on Twitter, and had like made some like mutuals, and kind of, and I just kind of made an offhand comment about like, well, I should write fanfic, but like I don't know if I'm like, trying to write something that messy, because I was like, thinking about like, I mean, most of my fic is like smut fic. So this is like the only one that's not. So yeah.
Surprise, this
So
is the one that's on the
um
podcast.
but what happened was like I was just kind of being like, lol, like just not even taking it seriously. But like a bunch of people were like, you should do it. Oh my gosh, you should totally do it. And like really encouraging and like continuing to bring it up, and like, oh, are you like writing? And like, so I just decided to go for it, because it was just like I was kind of surprised at like how encouraging everyone was being. So I was just kind of like, okay, fuck it. Like I'm gonna write this like ridiculous. It was like a it was like a Silver Flint vein situation. It was like So it was really, yeah, I
Of
love it.
course, they were
But
encouraging you. They wanted to read
mhm,
it. That's
yeah,
they wanted a new dealer.
no, like for real.
Gotta get it.
No, like really though. Like that's but so yeah, so that was what I ended up writing was this is like over the top kink fic. Um and yeah, and so then but it when it was really fun. So I was just like, I just keep writing stuff because this is fun. And it was nice to have an interest that didn't feel like high stakes. Like I didn't feel like I had to like I wanted to be good at it, but I didn't feel the same kind of like perfectionism I tend to around my hobbies. So I think that was
Mhm.
kind of a relief. Mhm.
So this particular fic centers on Eleanor, and for the entire thing, you're in her POV. And Eleanor has been one of the most polarizing, one of the most hated characters on the entire show. And
Mhm.
considering you have the entirety of the British Empire, people tend to hate Eleanor more than those characters. I guess
Mhm.
I'm calling the British Empire a character, but more than
Mhm.
Woody
Kinda.
Rogers. But what are your thoughts on Eleanor? And obviously you don't have too many warm feelings for her. But what redeeming qualities do you see in her?
Yeah, see, this is what's so interesting about that I'm here to talk about Eleanor because my cards on the table, I don't really like Eleanor. I
Mhm.
kind of hate her. I am a notorious Charles Vane fan. Like, just I love him so much. He's my sweet baby girl and never did anything wrong in his entire life. No, that's not true. He did many things wrong in his life, but I still love him anyway. So that said, it's interesting writing about her because I don't like her. She's like fascinating to me. Like I kind of just want to shake her and be like, what's your deal? Like what's going on in there, you know? Like and I really struggled to empathize with her after her betrayal of Max. That was
Mhm.
like I actually kind of liked her. I was kind of like, okay, she's like kind of mean, but like I like her all right. Like, you know, she's a girl boss, you know, all that. But like when she betrayed Max, that just I
Yeah.
couldn't after that. And I don't like when I can't empathize with a character. I find that troubling because I generally usually can. But in terms of like what redeeming qualities I see in her, see, that's so hard. And I think it's more like I see what she could have been if some of her circumstances were different. Because I think that, like, I don't think she's like an inherently evil person. I don't think she doesn't care when she constantly betrays people who trust her. I think she cares a lot and she keeps doing it anyway, which is
Yeah.
almost worse in a way. I think I unfortunately see a lot of myself in her. I say unfortunately because I think the things that I have in common with her are like not particularly flattering comparisons, but I think, you know, I sometimes describe myself as a former troubled teen. And so like I think I see that kind of like struggle for like identity. Like she doesn't really know who she is. And so she tries to find that mostly through men,
Mhm.
um, which is very relatable to me because I think I used to be much more that way when I was younger and didn't really have a that sense of self. And so I can relate to that. So it's hard because like it's like I want to be like, okay, like she could have been different if certain things had been different for her. If her dad was different, or if, you know,
Mm.
like if it's almost like if any one thing in her life had been a little different, I think she could have been a lot kinder than she
Yeah.
was. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. I also, however, think that in a lot of ways she is a parallel to Flint.
Mhm.
The way that she will regrettably betray someone,
Mm-hmm.
to stay true to her cause, to what she believes is the ultimate best goal, whether it's for her or for the group. She is going to step over anyone that she feels that she needs to, and that included
Mm-hmm.
Max. And you can see the regret. But again, she does it anyway. Like
Mm-hmm.
she understands, and that, I think that's one of the most upsetting things, is that she understands in the moment what she's doing, because you
Mm-hmm.
see her understanding it, and
Yeah.
then you see her go through with it anyway. It's not unlike with Flint and Gates,
Yeah.
where he knows what he's doing. He apologizes first. Like, that first "I'm sorry" is before the neck crack. And
Mm-hmm.
that is very much an Eleanor parallel. That
Mm-hmm.
he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly the sacrifice that he is making, but in his mind, he has deemed it necessary. And
Yeah.
when he comes back and he talks to Eleanor, he says, "What did you do? What was necessary?" And
Mm-hmm.
so much of Eleanor could have had that same arc where she rises above that and understands the greater good and is swayed, because that does happen, I believe, with Flint in season 3. Once he meets up with the Maroons, he finally understands, outside of his crazy, hyper focused revenge mode, that there is a greater cause out there, and that it can align with his, and that it can do equally good. But I do understand the circumstances with Eleanor and her dad.
Mm-hmm.
She was taught very, very early on that she has to survive on her own, because he left her after the Spanish raids. He left her. Having that understanding of your father, and then having that hatred, as well as understanding the need to still have him around. We can obviously go really deep into Eleanor's daddy issues, but the thing that I fully understand is her rage towards Vane. I get it. I
Mm-hmm.
get it. I never had a great relationship with my dad. Never. But if someone decided to take that decision out of my hands, that would be it. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
would fully mourn my father, even though I have a lot of trauma that I'm still unpacking. So, yeah. So I guess that's where I stand
Yeah.
with Eleanor, is like, I see the parallels with Flint, and I understand. I've always kind of understood psychologically what broke her, because
Mm-hmm.
she is not an unbroken person. And you see that. And especially, again, I'm going to shout out Kelsey, because Kelsey's artwork that she did for this
Oh,
episode, mind
it's
blowing.
so,
It's
yeah.
so beautiful. But the
Yeah.
reflection in the mirror, she's so sad. She's seeing who she was, and she is, like, you brought this up, and it was absolutely perfect. She does change her personality to go along with the man that who she sees as her savior in her life at that point.
Yeah.
And she has fully given herself over to this idea of this traditional English lady that she is not. And she fully hated. And you saw just how much she reveled in her own, I guess we can say, girl boss, but just in her own sense of confidence in
Mm-hmm.
season 1, season 2, when she was like, okay, all right, I'm left with nothing, but I'm going to pick up the reins, and we're going to go. We're going to go. We're going to do
Mm-hmm.
it without my father. We're just going to go. And
Yeah.
I, I, I do admire that. That is what I admire with Eleanor.
Yeah. I think she was the most herself in season 2. At least that's the way I see it. Like, even her clothing is kind of, it's different from season 1. Season 1 is a little more a little more masculine, a little more like loose. She's not wearing it. So I overanalyze costumes a lot. So like the garments are not, there's, I mean, she's got some fitted pieces, but there's less structured garments, less like fitted pieces.
Mm-hmm.
In season 2, she's got like that cool leather jacket. Like she's got like some things that seem, it's like different from things she wore in season 1, but it's not the like restrictive, like English lady kind of stuff she wears in the rest of the show. And like I think in season 2 she was, like she was picking up the pieces and she was doing things for herself without her father. And I think that, and she had her own goals, like her, you know, like with Flint and everything. So I think, and I definitely see like the parallels there, and the same with Silver and Max too. I think there's parallels in their stories.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I see that as like the closest to like actual Eleanor we really get. And so it's interesting. Like she, you know, you talked about like the like her anger toward Vane because of like taking that choice from her. And I think it was that, but I have kind of I feel like sometimes I feel like I have like one of those like boards with like the string and the pins, like I've lost my mind or something when I talk about this, because I have this whole theory that kind of it in particular, it involves like 3 specific moments in the show with her and Vane. And one is the conversation where he talks about like how she wants to have a world without fathers. And one is their conversation in the fort about like legitimacy, where he's being like, that's bullshit. And then the other one being the scene in the prison, which is so difficult. But I think that her anger toward Vane is about him killing her father, but I think it's also about him not being a father figure, because like he's not daddy, you know what I mean? Like he wants to be equal partners with her. This is my take. I think he legitimately wants to be partners with her. He's not interested in telling her what to do. He's not interested in being her father. He's not interested in like, you know, controlling her. And I think that doesn't sit right with her, because I think that's why she ends up with someone like Rogers, because he is that. He is kind of controlling. He is trying to be like paternalistic to her. And I think she holds like anger toward Vane for not being that.
I can see that, and I totally agree, because a lot of times, you know, when whether it's toxic or not, we look for love that we understand. And she doesn't, because she was never presented any other options. You know, she doesn't understand Vane's kind of love, which he's so soft with her. Yeah. Okay. He punches her. But at the same time, like, again, it goes back to him viewing her as an equal. And, but just every interaction, like, especially when they're having the meeting with Vane and Rackham and to set up the consort. And when Vane is initially talking to Eleanor, he almost stutters. Like, and he's asking about the leads, like he's so nervous because he so wants her approval, and it's incredible. You brought up something that made my brain kind of ping. You said in season 2, Eleanor gets this like fitted leather jacket. Well, guess who else gets a leather jacket in season 2 and starts to harden? Flint. So we're getting those parallels. They both go from the softer cloth of season 1 and then going into heavier trauma, and Flint is about to go through it, and Eleanor is about to go through it. It's like putting on a tougher skin and preparing for battle. And like, it is interesting that wardrobe change happens for both of them.
Yeah, that I haven't even thought about that with Flint, but you're right. And like then they really do, and then that's when their alliance is like the strongest.
Yeah.
And that they really are, like in that position. Yeah. And I think like that's where, and that was actually where I think I kind of in a way gave up on her at this, like fully in a way, exactly when Vane did. I feel like I was like very much in his head the first time I watched it, and so like I was kind of like going back and forth on her, like as like along with him. But like that was when I was kind of like, oh no, like that's not like this is like your last chance, But it's interesting because she is more hardened, but whereas like Flint is like he's like trying to find his sense of self. Like I feel like they're both trying to find that sense of self, but they're looking for it in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I think I had trouble also, is because I agreed with Vane. And not just because I love him, but because I thought he was right about England's never going to accept you, that there's no legitimacy. And I think that like, I mean, Black Sails is queer, like it's a queer story, but I think like even within it, like I think Eleanor and Vane's story is kind of a queer story. Like even though, I mean, she's queer, but like well, I have my theories about him, but like even their narrative, she's going with Flint and this like kind of like assimilation and this like trying to fit in, and Vane is going, no, like that doesn't work. They're not going to accept you. They're not going to accept me. That's just not how this works. And that really hit me because I think like, and I think that was part of why I was so much on his team there, and kind of like the whole time like looking at Flint and Eleanor like, don't do it, y'all, this is a bad idea, because I really didn't think it would work. I didn't think that anything good would come of them taking Abigail back to Charlestown. Like we all saw what happened, but I think that she in trying to find herself and like create some stability for herself, she ends up going so far in the other direction that she's not herself anymore. Like the one that always sticks out to me is like with the embroidery, and she just looks like so just like she hates it, like
yeah. Yeah. And then when you see Woodes Rogers' projection of her after she's died, and like his mental, what haunts him is her doing the embroidery. And it's just like, that wasn't her, dude. Like that was not her. And it's just like no one really got to see who she was, but Vane. Vane is the only one who fully understood her. What bothered me about the entire interaction with Abigail and getting her out and getting her to Flint is that you do understand that Miranda and Flint have, a deep desire to make sure that she is safe. Obviously, Miranda knew her as a child, but again, when you see the way that Eleanor interacts with her, even though she is the one, quote unquote, rescuing her, she still is fully using her as a pawn, just in a different way than Vane. And it's really interesting. Now, I don't think, of course, that it is in her best interest at all to still remain caged up with a bunch of pirates. But at the same time, yeah, I agree that her motives were gray at best.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's that's the thing. I think she's like a deeply selfish person. And like I get it, because I think it's the kind of selfishness that comes from just like really severe trauma and having to be selfish for like survival. I mean, like I don't like I get that, but it also ultimately she just does what she wants, you know. But I think that like it's like I go back and forth on it, because I think she convinces herself of a lot of things. I think that's kind of like how I wrote her, as like a very unreliable narrator. Like I think she convinces herself that a lot of things are true that are not true, because she needs to believe them. This is my interpretation. I think Charles was telling the truth about her father, and I think she knows that he was telling the truth, because that sounds like some shit a little weasel like Richard Guthrie would do, you know. Like he would absolutely do that. And we don't really have any like evidence of Vane lying to her really about anything. He's pretty brutally honest, so it doesn't make sense. I mean, I think it was like I think it was probably like, you know, pretty shitty to bring that up, but like like, but I don't think he was lying. I don't think he would make that up. So, you know, I think she knew that. I think she knew it was true, and I think that's why she got so mad. With the prison scene, one of the things that like always strikes me is like, I think that every awful thing she said to Vane also is true about her. And I think she knows that on some level, in particular the stuff about like not having a mother, and like it just I think it's about her as much as it is about him.
Oh yeah. It's interesting because, you know, we all acknowledge that she did not have a real father figure in terms of someone to learn from how to be a decent human being. But at the same time, she didn't have a mother to learn how to be a woman in that society. Because look at the rest of the island. If they are not having to sell their bodies to survive, you know, they are pirates, or, you know, there's no representation of a woman who is able to be strong on her own, except for Miranda. Miranda is the only representative of strong womanhood and strong motherhood that does not involve sex and does not involve violence. And not that there's anything against sex work for those who absolutely are surviving on it, or, you know, if that is personally fulfilling to you. There's nothing, I'm not maligning sex work at all, but to have no other alternative, to have no representative in your face. And I think she recognizes that immediately in that scene that she has with Miranda before Flint starts attacking the fort. That Miranda is initially in that scene extremely maternal to her. Just, you know, oh, you know, Flint has talked so much. It's very much like, in a way, Flint is her pirate daddy. So like, oh, your father has told me so much about you. Like that's just how that scene seems to me at the very beginning. But the backlash is so instantaneous. Like she resents it so much, to the point where I guess she feels resentful that she has to share Flint with Miranda, but also she feels threatened, I think, by Miranda's ability to exist on her own merits without having to be on the coattails or be under the wing of someone. Because technically she is under the wing of Flint, but she is very much strong on her own. And, you know, is able to survive for long stretches when he is not there.
Yeah. And he's also like, I think she also has a lot of power over him, as well, like in her own way. And
Hmm.
honestly, I think if you gave every single person on that show like an hour in a room with Miranda, she would fix them.
You would
Like I
fix
just
everything.
like
Absolutely.
she would just like I actually have this idea where I want to write a fic where her and Charles meet, because I'm like, she would fix his trauma like so
Yep.
fast. Um, but it's interesting like that you talk about like the thing with Miranda, because that this is something I've thought about a lot, but I haven't thought about it from the perspective of like the maternal figure. I mostly thought about it from like the dad angle, because that's just more personally where I tend to have like my own history. My dad passed away a few years ago, and
Mhm.
he struggled with addiction when I was younger. And I think a big difference between I feel like this sounds mean, but she's like not a real person, she's a character. But like I think one of the big differences is that my dad did actually love me, and like
Yeah.
he cared and he tried. So even when he was struggling like with his own stuff, he tried to be a dad, whereas like Eleanor's dad didn't give a shit. He really didn't. And that
Yeah.
like, but I think because of that, and because you were talking about like the way she just so rejects it, I think, and like this is hard to say because I think this is something that has taken me a long time, is I think that Eleanor is mistrustful of anyone who loves her, because she hates herself so much that she finds it suspicious that someone would love her. And
Mm.
it's like she can't accept it because, oh, well, if you love me, I'm terrible. So what's wrong with you that you would love me?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I totally get that. And I have felt that many times in my own life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Me too.
if you really knew
Yeah.
me, you would not, you know, and it's such a broken way to think, you
Yeah.
know, because, of course we all are looking out through the filter of our own baggage and through all of our life experiences, but but we never see everybody else's, and it's just, yeah. So one of the things that now I'm curious about is whether what have you taken from Black Sails in terms of story and character
Oh.
complexity to that has informed your work as a therapist?
That's actually really interesting, because I think it really it does make me think about like I think it's kind of like it interacts, because I think a lot about attachment theory and like the way we and so that's like why all this like mommy and daddy stuff comes up. It's not like a Freudian thing, it's not like sexual in any way, but it is like we learn based on those like relationships we have from when we're tiny, how to interact and be in like relationships with other people in the world. And
Hmm.
so I think that's actually Eleanor and Vane both, like they don't, I mean, in different ways, they don't have that. I mean, honestly, most of the characters probably don't, for the most part. I think that's true, but I think that's part of her struggle, is that she, just from a young age, she didn't have a decent person to like learn how to be a person from.
Yeah.
And I think about in season 4 when her grandma was talking about her dad, and now he was I can't remember what it was. It was a story about like a rabbit or something. What was
The
it?
cat.
The
Yeah.
cat. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
The
him
cat
being
that
so
kept coming to
sensitive.
beg. Yeah.
And like it makes you think like, oh, okay, like that was like beating out of Richard too, like at some point he was like a child who was capable of caring about a cat, and
Hmm.
that changed, and so I think that's an interesting little parallel there, because I think she just like learned to be kind of a dick, like she was
Yeah.
just like kind of a mean person. And I think she just didn't have anyone to learn that from. And so I think it's hard to say if it informs my work or if I sort of like it goes back and forth between like my work like influencing what I think about what I watch. And actually that's true because I tend to view things like I was saying, how I think the first time I watched it, I was really like thinking like Vane. I was like, I just sort of like literally the first moment I saw him, I imprinted on him like a baby duck. And it was just like, he was the character. He was terrible. I didn't even like him, but I just like was like, this is my guy. I didn't like him yet. I was so in his mindset. And I think I did, rather than looking at stories as like an overall thing, I have a tendency to like sort of like zoom in on a character and kind of like ride through the story from their perspective. And I think it's because that's like how I just like tend to think, because I'm used to trying to like empathize with an individual like that. But I will say, like, this is like kind of going back to like the queer narrative stuff, because a lot of the clients I work with are queer. And I definitely think that Black Sails is really like one of those things where it's not like I hadn't considered these things, but I do think some of my perspective around like the idea of relationships in general was really like expanded, because there are so many different kinds of relationships. Like there's like, you know, I always think about like Ranger Crew. In the end, they actually have like pretty functional, healthy relationships with each other, which is weird because they're like, they start out like the messiest out of all of them, you know, and like, but like functional like poly relationships and like queer platonic relationships and like these like it's interesting to see that presented in a way of it just being normal, not normal for like the world they're in, but that's the thing, is like none of them are normal. They're all different from other parts of society. And so I think I tended to think of like the Pirates of Nassau as like a queer community. And so I think that is definitely something like that stood out to me, is like looking at the way the relationship dynamics on the show play out. And I think that's like impacted me a lot.
It is really interesting. And I think, okay, because sometimes, you know, my favorite part of these interviews is when someone says something that I'm just like, oh, and it completely rewires your brain for a second. Okay, yes, the Ranger Crew. So what we have structurally in Black Sails is we have two polycules, and we have Jack, Anne, and Max, and we have Thomas, Flint, and Miranda. And those are our two polycules. And it's interesting that you start out with looking at the healthy relationship before everything goes to shit that Thomas, Miranda, and James have. They're respectful. They're tender with each other. They are checking in with each other. And, you know, even with that scene, Thomas doesn't ask explicitly for consent when he kisses him that first time at dinner, but there's a constant checking in, looking at his face. There is, I mean, the consent is there. There are questions asked and answered on their faces. So you see that strong bond, and then you remove one of the legs of the table out from under it. You take out Thomas, and that there's no structure there anymore. There's not enough. And then you have Jack, Max, and Anne, and they're sussing each other out. They don't fully trust each other, but you see over the course of the series that bond form where they do come to an understanding. They do develop a deep love. And I think it's also because you mentioned imprinting before. Jack and Anne, as little baby people, they imprinted on each other.
Oh yeah.
You remove a leg from that table, it will structurally stand.
Yeah.
They have that bond and they have that strength in each other that James and Miranda did not have, that is going to stand. And that pulls Max in because she sees that structure and she sees that trust. And so she trusts in it and she falls in love with that structure as much as she falls in love with Anne. And I think it's interesting that we do see those two parallels, and one of those crumbles into dust and the other is standing tall at the end.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that about like the structure, because I think about the what Max said about it just being sand and like it, you feel, that everything's like ephemeral for her, there's no stability, but like she does find some stability there. And I find that really interesting. And I think it's like, I even like, I also think of like, Featherstone and Adele, or like some of my favorites. Just like little, I love them so much. And also, and so here's where I'm going to get into my whole, like, this is my like fan and favorite stuff is like Vane and Jack, because I am like a Vane Rackham truther. I love their relationship. And so like what, like regardless of like the nature of it, they have like, like I'll write them one way, but like they have like such a deep connection, especially like when you see them in season 3 and like, it's like Vane saw something in Jack or Jack wouldn't have been where he was, and like when Jack really like comes into his own and, he's like his own, it's that thing of like being your own person, right? Like when he is not in Vane's shadow and he's his own person, they really have this like, I mean, he cares about Jack so much that he didn't murder him for doing something that Vane finds morally abhorrent. And there's not many things Vane finds morally abhorrent, so like that's that's pretty bad. But and it truly was like what Jack did wasn't okay, but the fact that their bond is so strong that he doesn't just straight up kill him, I think is like really big there. And I think like all of those like, and that's like, and then you see that addition too with like the polycule stuff with like the Silver and Maudie like connection with Flint and the Hamiltons, right? Like there's like, I feel like those are the sort of like poly dynamic ones that everyone tends to like group together because they do have these like extended sort of relationship networks with each. And I think there's like with like Vane's interactions with Jack, especially as like Anne and Max get closer, it does seem like Vane and Jack seem to become closer. And so I see like a lot of like support and trust there, which is really cool.
I think, because we do have the canon polycules, and then we have the subtextual polycule that is desperately trying to form, except one of the table legs has a bomb strapped to it, and that is Silver. So like you can't, Flint and Maudie were like, we are here for this table, just strap us on, and Silver is just like, nah.
John
Table's gonna go kablooey.
I love writing John Silver. He's so tricky because I'm like, it's like, what's going on with you, man? Like, he's like, it's impossible to know what's in his mind, but he is just so fun to write. I think I can, some of the characters I have a really hard time writing dialogue for, and I think I can write Silver dialogue easier for some reason than some of the others. But he's just a complete wild card all the time, and like you just never know, and we don't ever know, because like even in the end, when Flint's like, tell me your backstory, he's just like, it's fine, doesn't matter. And which you would think that would be unsatisfying. That was not, at least to me, that was not an unsatisfying answer in the story, like that we don't get to know it. It felt like, yeah, okay, that checks out. But yeah, it's like and I think that's the thing is like, yeah, like whereas with like the Ranger crew, like it sort of stabilizes with Flint and Silver, and like, yeah, like there is like this inherent instability that they just can't get past.
And I think, yeah, you're definitely right in terms of Silver is definitely a tricky character. And he is written in such a way that if it weren't for the performance that Luke Arnold gives, there's no way that you would be able to root for this character. But there's so much that happens emotionally on his face. You can see whole wars battled. And it is remarkable. And I think that's why he and Toby play so well off of each other, because they have this subtextual acting down.
Yeah. And I
really,
remember
really strongly.
Yeah. I remember in it was one of the Fathoms Deep interviews with Zach McGowan. He talked like how there was like a question of like him and Luke and who was playing Silver and who was playing Vane. Like it was like not settled. And I've thought about that a lot. And I think that Luke could have played Vane and it would have been like pretty good. It would have been a different Vane. It wouldn't have been Zach's Vane, which that would be such a loss, right? Like I think he could have done a different thing and it would, but I just, no disrespect to Zach because I love him so much, but like I just don't think anyone but Luke could have been Silver.
Absolutely
with Toby,
not.
Stevens, Flint. Like it just couldn't. No one could have done it.
No one could have gone toe to toe and still made you question who are you going to root for. It was just a monumental feat of acting that that he was doing, especially towards the end. It's absolutely fantastic. Just phenomenal performances.
I keep thinking about the costuming because that's come up. Eleanor's, she's in her like fancy dress and she just looks so uncomfortable. Like she just looks so uncomfortable the whole time. But Max and Adele are wearing the same things and they do not look uncomfortable. They look very pretty. And I mean, Eleanor looks pretty too, of course, but like they don't look like it's not them.
Yeah.
They look like there's some pretty ladies wearing some nice clothes, whereas she looks like super, super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And,
she looks like a bird that's had her wings clipped is what she looks like.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Oh, that like hurts my feelings because it's so true. But like it, yeah. And then also like thinking about Silver, I'm like all over the place, but it's like these dots are connected in my head. We talked about the coats, right? Well, in like season 4, right? Silver gets like a fancy coat, right? Like toward the end, like he also sort of, I don't know, it's like there's this, the coats are just very important in Black Sails. They like carry a lot of meaning, the costumes in general, but the coats, I think like there's a lot there. I think that's just interesting to think about that Silver also like his wardrobe changes as he becomes more like dominant or more like equal with Flint, right? Like he's not wearing his like kind of like cute little sailor boy like striped shirt, or he's wearing like this almost like military kind of looking deal, It's really interesting the way that shows up in the show, and also the hair, because you can generally tell a Black Sails character's like mental health based on how messed up their hair looks. Because when they're doing well, it's like glossy, it's like groomed, and when they're not doing well, it's like it's not great. So like there's so much detail put into all of those things. Anyway, I just went off on one, but it made sense in my brain. So.
All right. So we were talking about Eleanor. let's get back to your writing. What is a favorite passage of yours that you've written? One that you're just really deeply proud of?
From like, well, like overall, like from anything?
Overall, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, so this was an interesting one because, you asked me about that. And the ones that I did that were some of my favorites were not things that I wanted to say out loud on a podcast.
I got it.
So that took me a minute, and so what I actually ended up looking at was my most recent one I wrote, which was a Silver Maudie fanfic. That was like a real different thing for me, because I usually like have written explicit fic with cis men, and this was like not that, because it was Maudie. And then I also, in this one, I wrote Silver as trans, and so it was like a real different kind of thing to write, like, just in terms of like physical, descriptions of things was for me, writing that was different, but it was like really fun. But the part that I really liked was when I'm talking about kind of like their relationship and the differences with her and Flint. And so the passage, so the context is they're like sitting on the beach together, and I'm sort of recapping some things about like the time Silver spent with Maudie when, after Flint left for a while. And so they were both heirs to something of great importance and could understand each other in a way that not many people could. As their friendship had grown stronger, it began to blossom into something more. It was unlike anything Silver had experienced before. He was used to relationships being fraught, love and turmoil intertwined, but being with Maudie, it was easy. Their connection was built on stability rather than chaos. So that was the one that stood out to me, because I really I love their relationship so much. They both are this sort of like heir apparent, they're both the prince who's gonna, inherit the throne. And I think they have an understanding there that like no one else could really have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. And
thank you.
Based on stability rather than chaos, that I fully understand. One of the things that I was gonna mention, but I forgot amidst we lost connection for a sec, is one of the reasons that, going back to our Eleanor conversation, that I really feel like I relate with Eleanor is early on when I was first watching the show, I did feel so much of a kinship to her in terms of, struggles with her relationship with her father. And, and I felt like there's a quote from the film Capote where Truman Capote is talking about relating to one of the killers. And he said, in learning about his childhood, he was saying that it was so much like his own. He said, it's almost like he got up and I went out the front door and he went out the back door. And it was there that our lives and paths diverged. And, it's that whole statement, that whole mentality. I grew up in the South, so, there, but for the grace of God, like, I've heard that phrase so many times. And, regardless of whether you're relating it to Christianity or spirituality of any way, but we all have those opportunities. We all have those points in our lives where one single choice can divert our path to one way or another. And looking back and being able to see those points where we stumbled or where we made a wrong choice. What's heartbreaking is you can't change it, even if you can see it. You also can't change who you became after that point. Just because you can see the point where you changed, it doesn't mean you can undo all that damage. And that is what, to me, breaks my heart about Eleanor, because I think she sees that point, and I think she sees it the whole time. And I think she is fully confronted in it when she is laying there dying in the dirt and Flint is holding her, and she just asks him desperately, please lie to me. And he sees it, he understands it, and he tells her the lie. I think she knows it's a lie, and thinks she's asking. She knows him, and she knows that this is what he would do. And that is why, in a sea of Eleanor hate, I understand her. I disagree with her. I'm disappointed with her, but deep down, I can't fully hate her. And I don't I think that's one of the strong points of the entire series, is that there are very few characters other than Dufresne that you can fully, deeply say, I just despise this person. Like you can see humanity in every single character. And, that's how it is in life. We very seldom have clear-cut villains. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the show. It's also what has me really, really excited about the Percy Jackson series, because just if they are bringing that same mindset and mentality to the writing of that show, like I am all in. I'm very excited. Very excited.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree with you. And I think that was actually the part like where that was kind of like my empathy breakthrough with Eleanor, was when she died. And that's like, I hate that it had to be there, but I think that was where it was, because, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about Flint being kind of a father figure in a way. In her last moment, he was there and he did lie to her, and I think she knew he lied, but it was that's probably one of the best choices Flint ever made. I think it was kind, and he didn't need to do it, but he did. He chose to be kind. And I think, and Eleanor ultimately, I can cry. Eleanor ultimately did protect Maudie. And like she did make. I did so good about not crying this whole time.
It's okay.
I can't help it. It's Maudie. Like I love her so much. But Eleanor ultimately did choose to do that. And like she did decide at that point to do the right thing. And like that, if she was just hateable, that would be easier. I think I think like I've talked to like, friends who are also like very big like Vane fans like I am, who are just like very like, Team Charles Vane was right, and I think there's almost this feeling of like, even if you hate Eleanor, you have to love her a little bit, because you can't understand Charles Vane if you don't love Eleanor a little bit. And then I was, I come at it from his perspective, because that's how I'm used to thinking, but like that's why writing this was so interesting, because I was, switching that. And it was impulsive. I didn't plan to write this. I just like suddenly felt like I had to one day. It was weird. And like I think that's like giving her that like final moment where it let us see like some of her better qualities, but I think it also let her see that too.
She understood that she had, with whatever she had left, she could make it right in some way. How much blood did she lose dragging Maddie out of the house? Like that's one of the things that has haunted me a little bit, is that she might have survived if she had just gotten herself out, but she chose to get Maddie out too.
Yeah. And I think like for someone who spent her whole life trying to get affirmation from men, because even when she was with Max, their dynamic was different than the way she is in her relationships with men, and she, that was clearly something she was seeking. And I kind of love that in the end, like, she dies like protecting someone that she thinks of as a sister.
Mhm.
um and obviously it's a lot more complicated with Monty being a slave. I mean, that there's like that whole layer of their story there that makes it different. But from Eleanor's perspective, that Monty was her sister when they were
Yeah.
little. Like, she sees it. I just love that, like, in the end, like, she chooses to protect another woman. I
Mm.
think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She has done so much to damage her relationships with other women throughout the entire course of the story. And in her last moments, yeah, she was like, no, you are my sister, and I will
Yeah.
not let you die by yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, uh,
Yeah. It's
it's such powerful writing, and just the respect that the writers have for the characters. No, every single one of them, no matter where they fall in the story, no matter whether they are supporting the protagonists or not, like the care that they take for these characters.
yeah.
Even Berenger.
Yeah.
Even fucking Berenger. Like, they
Yeah.
still give Berenger that moment with his locket.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, just the writers are desperate for you to see the humanity in everyone. And I think that's such a
Yeah.
beautiful message, especially that this is our episode for Pride Month, is seeing
Yeah.
the beauty in everyone.
I think that humanity is important because you see how someone who has redeeming qualities could also, like Flint's like really likable. He like, his whole motivation is around like love and heartbreak, and he murders his best friend. It's important to be humble enough to recognize that we could also do something not great if we just assume that wouldn't happen.
Exactly. Yeah, like, if we forget that, if we're thinking that everybody has the capability to do something deeply dark, deeply evil, we also have to understand that regardless of who you are, everybody has the capacity for great good and for great love.
Yeah.
And I think that is a thing that does separate certain mindsets from other mindsets,
Mm.
is that
Yeah.
people who are tolerant and more open-minded are looking for the good in other people. And
Hmm.
people who are shut off and closed off and saying, if you do not believe this way, if you do not see life through my particular lens, then you are not even worthy of my time, attention, or affection. You're not worthy of love and support. And I think that is a fundamental difference. If we all could see
Yeah.
the good in each other as alongside of the bad, then I
Yeah.
think the world would be infinitely better.
Yeah. And that's like, it's so tough because it's like, I believe that, you know in theory, and then also it's hard because there is so much like fucked up ideology that it's like
Oh
you
yeah.
clearly there are times where you have to draw a line, around like certain things where it's like, yeah, like, this shit hurts people, right? Like fucking
Yeah.
like turfs, right? Like fuck
Mhm.
that. Like, no, I'm not gonna like listen to that shit. But like, they're also still humans, and I think that's important because it's easier to think of people like that as not human, and it's more painful to think that other people are that bad,
Yeah.
and I think that's where like the difference is. It's not like an excuse for like or like trying to say like, oh well, they have like a good side. It's more like about being able to recognize like the nuance of just like humanity, and that
Yeah.
like we can know where to draw a line and draw boundaries around like not entertaining like fascist ideas, and but
Exactly. Yeah.
it's hard. I think it's just hard to think of bad people as having humanity, and I think in Black Sails they do a really good job of showing that for the most part. Like even like Rogers, you see his humanity. It's not flattering. He's narcissistic. He's like, but you see where he can be wounded,
Hmm.
like, and then I mean Jack certainly did, but like you see like the squishy part, right? Like the part that you can poke at. And I think that's a real strength in the show, is that they can show them, like you mentioned Behringer, like that. I love that they like give us that, because it's like, oh, he's terrible, but he also has a
But
family. But
yeah,
that
someone's
but
going to
that
miss
doesn't
him. Someone's going to
someone's gonna
cry.
miss
Yeah.
him, but it also doesn't make him not terrible, so it's like it's
Exactly.
yeah, that's what I yeah.
Yeah, because it's like someone who has all of those same connections, all of those same, the wife and kids waiting at home, and who can put on that facade of the father and go and be warm, can still go out and do all these awful things.
Yeah.
And that to me is truly terrifying. It is way more terrifying to think of someone who can compartmentalize that part of himself and still
Yeah.
go out and do these horrible, devastating things, and constantly being reminded of that fact should be a lesson to everybody that we all
Mhm.
have the opportunity to go out and make these bad decisions.
Yeah.
And the onus is on us every day. Every day you
Yeah.
walk out the door and you decide, how am I going to make the world better?
Yeah.
And every decision that you make is either spurring you towards that goal or away from that goal. And it's interesting because in Black Sails, that choice is put to the characters on an episode basis. Like every episode, the
Mhm.
characters have that choice. Am I going to do something good for me, or am I going to do something good for everyone? And in the
Mhm.
end, that becomes the final decision that rips Flint and Silver apart. Am I
Mhm.
going to do something that is good for me now? Or am I going to do something that is good for everyone going forward? And that
Mhm.
is that is the final decision. It's
Yeah.
it's interesting because not only do our characters have to make that decision, but the audience watching has to choose a side. It's almost impossible not
Yeah.
to.
I have such an interesting like relationship with that, because I think he was wrong. I think he did the wrong thing. I think it was a bad choice. I think
Mhm.
he took agency away from Maudie and Flint, but I just in particular with Maudie, I think that was wrong of him, and he should not have done that. And I also think I would have done the same thing he did, which
Yeah,
is
it's
really weird to think about, but I'm like, I get it. I might have done that too. I could totally see being scared enough my for my loved ones to do something like that and decide like, okay, it's better for them to be alive and mad at me, which is hard to think of, because I do think it was the wrong thing. I don't think you should
oh
have done
yeah.
that.
As a parent now, that decision is very easy for me to make. I would like to think that if there was some, epic, final stand battle between good and evil happening, I'd be like, okay, go forth. No, I'm locking my kids in the basement and we're not
Mhm.
leaving. It's like, it is interesting when the stakes are higher, when you have so much to lose. Flint had nothing left. He had
Yeah.
nothing left. And it's just
It's
it's just such a masterfully
it
masterfully
is.
written ending.
I felt that so much, but I also said, and this is where my relationship with Black Sails is interesting. I knew about Thomas before I watched the show because my partner, like I said, it's his favorite show. I had seen the reunion scene before. I only remembered two things about Black, like actual, like things I had seen. And it was the scene where Anne goes to Eleanor to say, like, hey, cunt, let's team up and, kill all these rapists, right? Like, I remembered that scene, which I didn't, and I didn't know the context for it. I just knew, like, okay, that's Anne Bonny and something's going on. And then I knew about Flint. I knew he was queer, and I knew about, like sort of general things about the story. I still know almost nothing about Treasure Island, by the way. Like, I know like some, it's very vague. It's weird. But mostly I know Treasure Planet, but I knew about Thomas. I knew he was alive, and I had seen their reunion like years before I actually watched the show. And it didn't hit when I saw it because my partner Nick, he showed it to me, and he was, oh my gosh, like it's his boyfriend, and they're in love, and he's alive, and he was like, freaking out. And I hadn't seen the show, so like I didn't know what was going on, but I was just like, I'm happy for you, I guess. But I did, because I hadn't seen it, I didn't know how impactful that was. So it's interesting because I knew that was coming. I knew the whole show that Thomas was alive. That's a weird, like, one thing to know about Black Sails going into it. But so that definitely impacted my, like, the amount of devastation I felt, I think, toward the end, because I, like, knew that was coming. Like, I knew he was gonna,
yeah.
And so, yeah, so that was just a little interesting with my relationship to how I first saw the show. Yeah.
That is interesting. Like, I've heard a lot of people who went in spoiled for Flint being queer, but I haven't heard a lot of people spoiled going in knowing that Thomas is alive at the end. That must have made for a much, much different viewing experience through the whole exact thing, because you have that hanging over the entire story.
And I did one, and actually, since kind of like I also didn't at first, I didn't know for sure if it was Thomas. I knew that he had a boyfriend who was alive at the end, was like kind of like the thing I sort of remembered from, because this was years before I watched the show, so like I didn't, and I don't have the best memory, so like it was kind of vague, so I was like, I think it's gonna be Thomas, but maybe not. But like then by season 4 it was pretty clear that it was. But yeah, that was an interesting thing to be spoiled for. I'm kind of like, I'm okay with it. I don't mind that I was like, and my partner, he always, he asked before he spoiled stuff for me, so I told him, like, sure, go ahead. But it was definitely interesting because like I was watching certain things happening, like like Max contacting the jailers, right? Like those little things that you don't pick up on necessarily in your first watch. I knew what was happening.
So you caught those the first time.
Yeah. Because I was like, oh, okay, this is what's gonna happen. They're talking about, I knew that he was in like a prison colony, like, so because I remembered the visual
imagery
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so yeah, so I knew that was going to happen. And I think my partner, he wanted to share it with me because I think that was, Black Sails was really important for him with his own like identity and stuff. So like I think it was like very important. He's like loves Flint and Thomas very much, so as do we all. But yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your process. Do you have any playlists that you like to write to? How do you get yourself into the headspace to sit down and write?
Yeah, so I do have so many playlists. I have a million Black Sails playlists. I have a whole Twitter thread with like links to all of them because I have them for like different pairings, different characters. The one that I listen to for this is my one. It's called Lady Honeypot. Was the title of it because I always loved that line. It's the only nickname anyone ever calls Eleanor that isn't mean. Which so that's kind of why I picked it. And it's got a lot of like angry 90s girl rock, and then also some like bubblegum pop and like
Mm-hmm.
R&B, like Ariana Grande, like kind of stuff on there. It's like Ariana Grande, but also like whole, you know, and
Yeah.
like Tori Amos. So it's like it feels very Eleanor, I think. And then yeah, and then but they're all really different, so it kind of depends on what I'm writing. I have a generic thick writing playlist that's just like a bunch of random stuff, and I named it "Sick of These Pirate Captains and Their Slutty Little Waists." Um, so yeah, I have like so many of them, and so it just like kind of depends on like the mood I'm going for and the fic I'm writing and the character. But I definitely use music a lot. Usually I plot out my fics, like I kind of outline them in general of like, okay, at this point I want this to happen, and then I want this to happen. This one was like stream of consciousness. This one was like it was like I've been thinking about Eleanor Guthrie for 3 days straight, and I can't stop, and I have to write this, and just sort of did. It was like I wrote it all like at once, like in the same day. And I went back and edited later, but it was very much like a thing that had to happen. Um, that was really interesting because it was really different from my normal process.
Yeah, it's almost like, because I've had times where my writing was like that too, where it literally woke me up in the middle of the night. I mean, I haven't written any fan fiction, but I wrote short stories and poetry for a long time. I haven't been in a headspace where I've been able to actually sit down and write anything that is other than like an essay or something like that.
Mhm.
Just chaos upstairs. But I equate something like that where it just has to come out is like a bloodletting. You just have to purge it from your system, and then it's
Yeah.
gone, and you can let it stew and it will fester, or you get it out and it's pure. The
Hmm.
longer, and that's one of the things, the longer I've let an idea sit without getting it down, the more corrupted it becomes. Get it out when
Yeah.
it's nice and pure, and
Yeah.
just let it be, let it breathe.
Exactly. Well, and I think that was important for this fic too, because again, I'm kind of a hater, and I tried to be really fair to her. Like I try, like a lot of the things that I wrote are not flattering. They're not like they're things that I think she would think that are distorted and not reality. And so I don't think it makes her like look good. I tried not to include anything that was just mean for no reason. I tried not to be like harsh on her unnecessarily. I tried to really objectively think about what do I think she was thinking here, and how do I think she was feeling. And so I think that was important for me to do it then, because I actually did have to like delete some lines because I was just like, Mary, that's just you being a bitch to Eleanor. Like that's not even like that's just like not even true. Like that, like she wouldn't think that. You're just like being mean for no reason. So like there were a couple of like snarky little things I took out before, before I published it, because it just wasn't, it didn't fit, so
Hmm.
I think it was important to do it like when it needed to happen, so I didn't start to like overthink it.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about it is that it is a very fair look at Eleanor, but it's also interesting in the amount of lies that she tells herself. And, that becomes very clear. And it's not, you don't approach it in an accusatory manner. It just is who she is. And
Hmm.
and that is how she survives. Is
Yeah.
she lies to herself. She has blinders on. It's how she gets through her days. It's how she sleeps. It's how she can look at
Hmm.
herself in the mirror. Reading the fic, I would not have been able to tell that you fully hated Eleanor, because it is quite fair, and it is moving in a way where you understand the situation that she feels that she is in, even though she's placed herself there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like it's that's where it kind of comes back to like I do relate to some of like her not particularly good qualities, or at least I think, I think maybe I'm less like her than I used to be when I was younger. I was joking about this with I was talking to some friends about doing this, and I was joking that if like Eleanor and I had been like friends in high school, we would have had like a sort of like intense codependent homoerotic friendship that would end when one of us like fucked the other one's boyfriend. Like that would absolutely be my dynamic with Eleanor. Like it would just be this really like fraught like girl drama. We have to be competitive for no reason. Like I just know that's like how we would have been. That competitive for no reason thing. But I think writing this did help me empathize with her more. It makes me sad. I think she makes me sad really more than anything, because I can see how she thinks like all those things she said to Vane, I can see that she thinks them about herself. I can see that she really doesn't think she's lovable. And it's kind of hard to be a great person when it's kind of like, if you don't think that you have any worth, why are you going to try to do better? Because nothing is going to matter because you don't have any worth in the first place. And I kind of think that's where Eleanor is at, is like she can't see herself as like worthy. So she makes the choices that she makes in order to either convince someone that she is, because she can't tell herself that. Like someone needs to tell her that she is. She's like not capable of believing that like from the inside, which is very relatable. Like that's honestly too relatable. And I know sometimes I still like that's the way I've felt at a lot of points in my life. And like I think that's something that like, if I feel like I'm not doing my best like in my relationships, so like I think I tend to, my brain will jump to like, yeah, well, you fucking suck, and it's like it's so harsh for like unnecessarily so. And I can say that now, like, because I'm thinking about it logically, but in the moment I think it's hard to convince myself that that's not true. And I've definitely like come a long way with that. It doesn't happen as often as it used to, but I think that Eleanor feels like that always. I think she feels like that 24/7. And I've been there before and it sucks. And I made different choices than she would, and I think that's the betrayal of loved ones is like where my difficulty with, that's kind of like my inherent like point at which I can't deal with her, because like that's very the opposite of what I would do. But in other ways we're like, yeah, I think she feels like that. I think she just feels like that all the time. And it's really hard to live like that. And that's really sad.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't like excuse her either. So it's like complicated,
Yeah. One of the things the show does is like, we've talked about many different parallels today. And another parallel that they do set up is Eleanor and Maudie get the exact same treatment from Woodes Rogers. If you look at back when Eleanor is first captured, she's in London and she's in prison, and he comes to see her after she has been captured, and she's bedraggled and she is broken down to just the base core of who she is. All of her character is distilled in that moment. And he makes her an offer. And you can either help me or you can hang. Same thing with Maudie. Maudie has been captured. She has been bedraggled. She has been sitting in a prison, and he goes to her and he makes her an offer. You can help me. You can sign this treaty and you can stop this war, or you will hang. I will kill John. That is the offer. And then where the characters diverge, where you see the weakness in Eleanor, where she completely folds, whatever. Yes, just tell me what I need to sign. And then Maddie, I will die fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a chorus of voices, a multitude.
That's where I think their backgrounds like are so different, and it impacts them. And obviously Maddie, you know, she was enslaved, like that there's that piece of it, and Eleanor has like a huge amount of privilege in that situation. So I want to, you know, emphasize that obviously I don't think that like Maddie had it easier or anything, but Maddie does have family. She has people. She has like a lot of people that love her. And I think like seeing like a character, she's one of the few characters in the show that we see have like people who love her and that she loves. And Maddie is capable of such deep compassion. And I think that's like where her and Flint differ too, is that Maddie really truly is motivated by her love of her people. Like I think that's like her core goal, whereas, you know, Flint's is reactionary. It's retaliatory, right? Like I think he does believe in the ideal that they're trying, you know, like the coalition building, you know, like I think and you know, like abolition, like I think he believes that. I don't think he's like, it isn't, you know, I think that's like, those are ideals he holds, but I also think that his motivation is largely personal. Whereas hers, like, it is in some ways, but it's also really not. It's not really about her. And I think that's the difference with her and Eleanor there too, is Eleanor doesn't have anyone else. Like at that point, Vane was the only person she still had in her corner, and she betrayed him.
Yep.
And she doesn't have anyone. There's like literally no one that will be on her side. So she I think she makes the choice that she feels like she has to make, right? Whereas Maddie has these deep connections, she has these loving relationships, she has a greater goal. And like Vane, honestly, in season 3, like he chooses to not be saved because he sees the bigger picture. Maddie also sees the bigger picture, and she's like, no, it's not about me, you know. And I think that's like the inherent difference is like in those connections with other people.
Yeah. So do you have, getting back to discussing writing and fics, do you have any favorite tropes to write?
Yeah, so my favorite trope of just all time reading and writing is enemies to lovers. I love it. I love writing Vane and Flint. I love that. I love writing just like gratuitous smut that like doesn't even really make that much sense. I wrote an AU that was like a biker. It was like a biker bar thing, and like it was very Sons of Anarchy, you know, and like they were like rival, but it was like I love writing that. I like to write, like I said, I write mostly smut, but I'm kind of branching out. Like I kind of want to do more stuff like this, character studies, but I do write a lot of like BDSM and like kink fic, just because it's fun to do so many good like dynamics, and especially with Black Sails. So I enjoy writing that. And it's funny because I mentioned this before, and this is Black Sails specific, but I have a real, well, okay, it's not Black Sails specific because I can't not write people holding hands for some reason. I'm always writing about people holding hands, and especially Charles Vane. But
yeah,
but because he's always trying to hold everybody's hand, and so he's always trying to hold hands with Eleanor, and she's like never wants to do it, but he tries so much. And I like to just like, it's funny because it's like kind of back and forth with like really kind of like intense, like either like BDSM stuff or like stuff where it starts violent, and then, you know, like enemies to lovers stuff where they're like fighting, and then turns into something else. but then I also really like to write things like hair brushing and like holding hands and really like soft. So it's kind of like opposite extremes.
And what is your background in creative writing?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So I used to write stories and stuff when I was younger, like kind of casually. I wrote a few fics. They were, when I was like a teenager, unfortunately, it was like Harry Potter, which like I'm not into because, fuck turfs and all that. But like, yeah, but I had kind of gotten out of it, and I like would read fanfic, but I never really like wrote it much. And it was difficult for me actually because I was in school. I did my undergrad, and then I went to graduate school, and I wrote a lot, and I had to write a lot. But it was scientific papers, it was research, it was very like structured research papers. It's very boring, very dry. And so going back to writing fiction was hard because it's like, what do you mean I get to use an adjective? And I struggled at first with putting too much description in because I was like so excited to like be able to do it. So I had, but that was interesting because that was like a difficult transition because my writing style had gotten very fixed in that sort of like structured research paper kind of way. And then the other things I write is like sometimes I'll write some poetry, and I like to write letters. I write letters to people a lot, and that's kind of like in just sort of a stream of consciousness way. And that's my, I guess that's kind of creative writing. That's like my other, besides fanfic, that's my favorite thing to do.
Letter writing is an art, and for if you look back in Jane Austen era, where everybody sat around and they read the letters out loud that they had received, like you strip everything away in terms of our modern society and technology and things like that, and like basic human correspondence, just telling each other stories of our lives, like it is very much a lost art.
I love it. It's so fun, and it always makes everyone happy. Everyone likes to get a letter.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
it's so good. Yeah.
That's why, like, this is gonna age me, but I remember when we used to write each other long emails. Like no one uses emails anymore, and and it's all texting now. And like I like to talk to people. I like to either write because I find it very easy for me to put my thoughts in order when I'm writing, and I think my strength as a writer is that I'm able to write in my speaking voice, that I can write conversationally without much struggle. But I love to talk on the phone, and so that was a huge struggle for me when I was living in Japan. Is that I had this desperate need to talk to friends and family back home, and everybody just wanted to, like, they were just going to text me. And I'm just like, no, I can't do that. I gotta hear voices. Yeah. I'm like, I'm on the other side of the world and I miss you.
Yeah, it's the human connection part, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, like when I first started talking to Anne, like that was just someone who was willing to talk to me for hours on end about stuff that we're both passionate about.
Same,
like that was just wonderful. Like
it's great.
This fandom is phenomenal. It draws people who are compassionate, who are interesting, who are intelligent. Like it's just it's better. It's different than any group that I've ever been involved in the past. And I have had my fandom experiences, but this is wholly unique.
Yeah, I've never experienced a fandom like this. Like there have been fandoms that were like fun and like, I like made friends and stuff like that. But like it's just got a really unique vibe in the way people like, I mean, I think I came along to it at a good time, is what I hear, because like I think that it had kind of settled, because the show wasn't like brand new. So like the fandom was mostly like the core people who were like ride or die Black Sails
Yeah.
fandom,
Yeah.
right? So I think when I came to it, which was like last summer, it was like the perfect time, because like there were like new people in the fandom, but also like it was sort of like rejuvenated. So, but it's been like, it's just a really truly different fandom experience than I've ever had, and I've made like friends that are like my, like some of my best friends in the whole world now, like not just like internet, but like true friends. And that's really unique because I've made friends from fandom before, but like not in the same kind of way. And I think it's just like, it just draws a certain kind of person and a certain like the like I don't know. I think this fandom draws specific people for a reason.
Yeah.
And I've it's everyone's just been so nice to me. Like I've just I've not encountered like a lot of the stuff that you normally find that's like not great in fandom. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been like a really
Toxic.
cool. Yeah, it's just so it's been a really like unique fandom experience for sure. Mm.
Yeah. So, are you working on anything right now?
Yeah, sort of. So I'm working on a Disco Elysium fan fiction, and then I've got like some drafts. I've got some of my like half finished ADHD like six that there's like a Vane Rackham one, there's like a Vane Flint one, a prequel to my first fic that's Silver Flint. But I don't know if I keep saying I'm gonna do that one, but I keep struggling to like get it. But I like to write. I might pick up the Vane Flint one a lot. Vane Flint is a fun one for me to write. It's almost like a palate cleanser for like writing Silver Flint, and it's like really intense and then like
Hmm.
emotionally like because Vane Flint's just like it's just like guys pressing their bods together, and it's not that complicated. So but yeah, and then I'm have been talking with a friend about doing like a Witcher crossover kind of thing. And then the other one that I have an outline for, so I'm like kind of like, and I haven't like fully started anything. I'm kind of like excited, but it's actually a character study one on Joji that I really want to write because
Oh, okay.
I'm obsessed with Joji, and because I'm like, hey man, what are you doing here? How'd you get here? What's going on? And I have in my head an entire backstory for him, and it's probably not even going to come up in the fic much because what I want to do is write about him right before his duel with Flint and at the end of season 4, and
Yeah.
sort of like kind of like I did the Eleanor thing, kind of like his thought process and what's going on with him internally and his relationship with Flint, his relationship with Death. And, like I have a whole, yeah, like this whole like samurai backstory thing going on that I know about, but is mostly just for me, So I kind of want to write that because Joji is so interesting because he's someone that we know, like two things we know about Joji are that he's good at torture and that Flint trusts him of all people to protect Abigail. And I think those are two really interesting details about him.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I just find him very fascinating.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, because so much of the Japanese culture is about honor and respect. And I think,
Mhm,
yeah, even though I think the show vastly underutilizes him, I think
mhm,
it does when you distill what we do get in regards to him, it does ring as true. It does ring as honest.
mhm.
So, what are your and I know this is a hard question for everybody. What are your top 5 favorite Black Sails fics?
Okay, so I thought very hard about this. So I have to say a couple of them are like written by really good friends of mine, but this is genuinely my list. And I read them before we were really good friends, so it doesn't even count. So my absolute favorite ever Black Sails fic is What's in a Name by Ghost Van Bonnie, which is like a Charles Vane backstory fanfic. I did do a sensitivity read for one of the chapters that's about like from his trauma, just because coming from my perspective, I'm working in like mental health and stuff, and it's really cool. I love Charles Vane, and I love the take on like what his life might have been before the beginning of the show. So that's like my favorite because it's Vane and it's just so good. So then the next one, and I think this one you might be doing, is There Most Certainly Lies a Dark Moment Between Here and There.
Yep.
By Short John Silver. Yeah. So yes.
So what's interesting is we're going to be doing both of those. So What's in a Name is going to be a series that we're going to do.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yes, and we're also going to do There Most Certainly Lies a Dark Moment. So that one is coming up as well.
That's going to be a really good one to do. And I that's another really good, like a good character study one. And that one, he wrote it in Ukrainian and then translated it. And I was going to attempt to say the original name of it, but I didn't have enough time to practice it. And I was going to say it bad. And so I didn't try, but that's cool about it, that it's got both the Ukrainian and the English version. And so my next favorite one, this is funny, is it's a series. It's the Sack of James Flint series by Princess K, colloquially known as Sack Saga, which it was not something I would have picked out to read because it's just not my thing. And everyone was like, you gotta read this though, like especially after reading the way I wrote Flint and Silver's dynamic in my first fic. I had people ask me if I had read this one already, because I write Silver as dominant with Flint, and I think that's like a lot of times it's the other way around. And so everyone was like, read this one, and it was Snack Saga is a like a BDSM like Silver Flint series that involves, we're gonna just say, CBT, but not the mental health kind, the other kind, and which is not something I would have picked out to read. But this series is so wild because it is like this like intense like kink fic, but it's also like gets into the relationship so deeply, but by the end of it I was like crying, like so emotional about their relationship. And so it's like really funny because like you go into it going like, really, y'all, like, are you like, I just don't think this is for me. And then by the end it's like I'm just like weeping because it was so emotional. So yes, that's another one. And then so the other ones I picked, Such Terrible Hungers by Etwell is that's just like, I don't know, it's like a really fun one. It's just one of my favorites. Like it's like a kind of like low stakes almost, like, I think a lot of times I read, if I read Silver Flint, it's like super intense and like emotional and angsty, and this one's just like not like, it's got that, but it's more it's a little more just porn. But it's fun to read. And then the other one is the Any Port in a Storm, which I think is a series by Farasha, I think is how you say it. Yeah. I really like that one. I'm not sure. Have you read that one before?
I have. And that one has been mentioned by I think Jay mentioned it last episode.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah. But yeah, those are great. There's another series, like some of the very first, if like you do the Silver Flint filter and then go all the way back to like the first page. Some of those, the earliest ones, there's an AU where, and it's by Farashaw, where James McGraw, prior to meeting Thomas, meets Silver as a young sailor.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, look that one up.
Yeah, I'm going to. Feeling really normal about that right now. Oh my God.
Yeah, I linked it in one of the Discord servers, but
Okay.
yeah, because I was like, someone had said they were wanting to see more pre-canon stuff, and I was like, oh man, have I got one? Have I got one for you? But yeah, definitely, I'll send you the link to that.
Okay. I've actually, you said more pre-canon stuff. I've wanted to write some like a Charles and Eleanor relationship, like pre-canon, like with like the falling out with Teach and all of that. And like I like the idea of writing Jack and Anne and Charles all like when they first come together. So yeah, I think some pre-canon stuff would be fun.
Yeah. All right. Are there any like avenues that you have yet to explore in your writing, or in terms of places that you want to bring these characters that you feel like you haven't been able to, or something that you've planned in the future for?
Yeah. So like one thing that was big for me, because I do, writing in particular, writing like smut fic, but like even just like in general, I'm trying to write more like not cis men, essentially, like because that's like what I've tended to do is writing like like men who love men, like cis dudes. And so the Silver Money one was like, that was why that was like such a change for me. So I'm trying to write like even like the Disco Elysium fic I'm writing is a lesbian AU, where the two characters from it who are like men in the game, I'm writing them as lesbians. So yeah, I'm trying to write like more women, like more trans characters, like more like just kind of and especially with Black Sails, like it already feels so queer all the time that it works. And I'm just gonna like mess around with all your genders and so yeah, I'm just trying to like branch out in that way, so I'm not staying in that little bubble that I think I used to feel more comfortable with. So that's a and then I really want to write more of Vane and Jack, because that's my Black Sails OTP. I love Vane and Jack. And I have the fucking hardest time writing Jack, because it's his dialogue. He talks so much and I have a hard time creating things for him to say for some reason, and I don't know why. Some characters are just so much easier to write, and I'm sure this is this way with other fandoms too, but like with Black Sails for sure, like some of them I just like, it's really hard to get their voice. And I did write a Vane Rackham fic, but it was a collaboration with Dean Bean. Hi, Dean. And she wrote a lot of the good Jack dialogue. Like if there's like a good Jack line in that fic, she probably wrote it. Whereas like, and I think that's partly because I tend to write, I write about like what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and it's like more like of a mood than it is like action and dialogue. And so I just have trouble with him, but I really love them and I want to write them more. So maybe I'll work on that.
Yeah, I do agree that Jack, I think, is unique in terms of um the rest of the characters dialogue wise. Jack almost feels like his dialogue was written for him by Aaron Sorkin. Like there's he says so much and it's always in the most complicated way in which he can say it.
Uh-huh,
On purpose.
uh-huh.
It's just very important to him how he is
Mhm.
perceived. And that
He
comes across in his dialogue.
Jack uses every word he knows like he's gonna lose them if he doesn't. You know,
Yes,
like
exactly.
yeah. And Jack's honestly probably like besides Eleanor, I think he's the character that I can relate to the most. And I feel like I have some of Jack's better qualities and some of her like worse qualities. Um but I do like I think some of his which might be part of why I have trouble riding him. Like maybe I'm because I'm kind of not kind of I'm very talkative, I'm loud, I'm um yeah, kind of like animated in that way. So I think yeah, so maybe that's part of why I have a hard time with him. Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
What kind of advice would you give to writers trying to break into writing about black sales or fan fiction in general?
Yeah, so I think one thing is like if you're struggling with a character or a moment or anything like that, like refer back to the show. Like I would be constantly watching certain scenes, like when I was writing a fic, or I would like get watch it and write down some lines from the show and like I'll use that as a way to start a section or something, something like that, right? Like, so taking some, because I tend to write in canon fic. I wrote that one AU, but mostly I write in
Hmm.
canon stuff. So I will do things like like I think in the Eleanor fic, I took some specific lines, quotes from the show and incorporated them. So yeah, like if you're struggling, like if you feel like you're losing a character's voice or it's starting to like go out of character in a way that you don't want it to, find some scenes that kind of like encapsulate that character for you or like the story you're writing and like watch it again. For the Silver Flint one that I've kind of half written, that's the prequel to my other one, I watched the scene of them taking the warship like so many times. Like I watched that whole like part of that episode over and over again because that's kind of like where it starts. And so yeah, like if I was like struggling, I would go back to it. Um and then the other thing is like in the spirit of black sails, right? Like in the idea of like the power of stories and like I think just like writing what's in your heart, like not trying to because not trying to write what you think other people want to see, but just writing the thing that you want to read and writing like the story that like you that's like true to you, I think is really important because you're gonna do a better job because it's authentic and you're gonna have more fun
Hmm.
than trying to force yourself to write something that doesn't feel like what you really want to be doing or like you just feel like um you should be. But yeah, like you're like writing the story that you have and not the one like you think you should have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to talk to
Yeah.
you today. And I'm so glad that you actually were one of the first listeners before the first episode came out. You
Yeah.
were a beta listener to A
Mhm.
Vulgar Holy Thing. And thank you so much. Um,
Yeah. I just listened to it and I like forgot I was actually supposed like like beta listening for a minute. Like I was just like listening to this audio book. Like I was just like into the story for you know, 'cause it was yeah, it's just incredible. And I, you know, I want to say like how much I appreciate that you're doing this podcast and like for the fandom. And I think like it's such a great fandom, and there's such good fics, and like the fact that you're like highlighting them in this way is like really cool, because I think we like fic writers don't get that appreciation usually. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, of course. And yeah, the writers really do not get the feedback and the highlight that they actually deserve. Because, you know, everything involved in fic writing only enhances the fandom that pops up around a piece of media, and it only enhances the enjoyment of it. It only draws in new fans. Like, it does so much for the fan experience, and you know, people kind of come and take what they want from it, but nobody really highlights the art of it. And I think that was a space that needed to be filled.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have some episodes already lined up. I'm going to be having Etoile, I believe, next month for our July episode.
Yay.
And then Ghost of Anne Bonny and Short John Silver are going to be coming on for their fic. That's the one that was originally written in Ukrainian, and Ghost of Anne Bonny helped with the translation to English. We have, this one is exciting. So we're going to be doing The Truth About Eros, which is a fic that I read years ago. And so that one is going to be coming up, and that is by Asia Lynn. So we have a whole list of Two Front Teeth Slightly Crooked is going to be on the podcast, and I'm very, very excited about that. So we have a whole long list of episodes coming up, and I'm so excited. And thank you so much for being such an early cheerleader for the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you so much, and thanks for having me, and like listening to me deviate to talking about Charles Vane all the time like I do. And
one can argue you cannot discuss Eleanor without talking about Charles Vane.
You really can't. I mean, you really can't talk about them without the other one. It's just like they're just too intertwined. But no, it was good, and I'm glad I got to talk about this fic, because it was just it was something that clearly needed to happen. Like it was just the story that I like had to write. So it was cool to talk about it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mary. What a wonderful and searing look at one of the fandom's most divisive characters. You can find Mary on Twitter and AO3 as @Vitchqueen with 2 V's instead of a W. You know, like in the olden times. Thank you to Kelsey, aka Magic Bubble Pipe, who drew the beautiful sketch of Season 3 Eleanor looking at a reflection of her former self in the mirror, featured online for today's story. You can find them on Tumblr at Magic Bubble Pipe and on Patreon. Kelsey does stunning work and takes commissions, so definitely check them out. And thank you to all of our listeners. Whether you're returning or joining us for the first time, we appreciate you and we'd love to hear from you. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and a review. It truly does help us to be discovered by more listeners, which helps to shine a brighter spotlight on these amazing artists and creators. If you're a fanfic author and have a favorite story you'd love to hear and want to join me on the podcast, please reach out to me on Twitter @KendraSpring or @AudioficPod, or you can send an email to readingbetweenthelinesPod@gmail.com. If you're not an author, but you've got a favorite fic you'd like me to read, all suggestions are welcome. Please reach out. Thanks again for listening. This has been Reading Between the Lines, a fanfic audio podcast. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.